Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and on my blog some time ago I mentioned that Judith Polgar had played some exceptionally good games in the recently completed European Individual Chess Championships. This is in 2011, for those of you who might be listening to this sometime later in the archives. She tied for first with Vladimir Potkin and I'm trying to remember who else, with Radoslav Wojtaszek, and I think one other player snuck in as well. And as far as the tiebreaks went, Potkin won, deservedly I think. Wojtaszek was second and Polgar was third. But as I said, Polgar did play some really exceptional games, and I threatened on my blog to mention or to discuss some of them. So I think I'll fulfill that threat. I won't quite say promise, but that what I hope to do with this video. So in this video, we'll take a look at 4 of her games from the event, or at least 4 parts of her games, not necessarily the whole thing. And we'll begin in round 4 with her game against Romain Edouard. So at this point, she had 2.5 out of 3. So in the first round, she drew with black against an IM, a player named Puch, who's 24-15. That was with black. In round 2, she beat another IM, Philippe, with white. And then in round 3, she beat Niels Grandelius with black. So here we are, round 4. She has white, and just going to kind of go through the opening really fast here, since the interesting thing comes later. So it's Sveshnikov Sicilian, and yeah, so she played c3, which is the classical line. c4 has been pretty popular the last few years. And anyway, nothing too special. I mean, she's got a perfectly fine game, but black is doing all right. And we end up with this kind of pretty typical sort of ending here with opposite colored bishops. Very often this is what happens in the Sveshnikov, so it's surprisingly, in a way, it can be a very drawish opening, at least in that this kind of ending can arise pretty often. All right, well, let's move on. So white has a little pull because her bishop is very good on d5. And in fact, okay, so she's broken through on f7, but it really doesn't mean that much at this point because her b2 pawn is falling, and excuse me, black is pretty active as well, with no really serious weaknesses. Okay, so h4 is a good move, not only to take care of the back rank, but to try to cramp black a little bit on the king's side. All right, so in a position like this, white has managed to maintain her edge, but really this should be a draw. There's not really any big target in the black position, but one idea might be to prepare h5 at some point. Well, here Edouard came up with a very poor idea, but a very natural one. I mean, it's a good idea in principle, but not everything that's good in principle is good in practice. So he played h6, and the idea of trying to swap off a pair of pawns makes very good sense. Then, well, there isn't going to be any h5 idea, and even if the g6 pawn were to drop eventually, black could probably absorb that pretty well. However, black missed something pretty big. So if you haven't figured it out already, you might want to try to do so now. Well, here's what he missed. So this nice breakthrough move, h5. And the problem is that if white gets a pawn on g6, the threat is rook to h7 mate. Pretty big threat. And there's not really any convenient way for black to deal with that. So neither pawn capture is any good. If he plays g takes h5, then g6, rook h7 mate is threatened. The only way I see to get out of that threat is to play rook to g8, king to g8, but then rook to d7 is a discovered check, and white ends up a rook ahead for nothing. Alternatively, she could even play rook to h7 check after king g8, king f8, rook h8 check, king e7, trade rooks, and then g7 followed by g8 queen. So that's completely hopeless for black. Similarly, h takes g5 is met by h takes g6 with the exact same threat and the same variations if king to g8. So Edouard tried rook to g8. And now if h takes g6, it's no big deal. And likewise, g takes h6, g takes h5 is check. And no problems there. But Polgar's attack continues with the move rook to d7. So the threat is to take the rook now with the bishop. And where does the rook go? If it goes sideways, if it goes anywhere along the 8th rank here, other than d8 where it just gets taken, then white plays h takes g6, and again, rook h7 mate is the follow-up. So rook to g7 is forced, but now after one more nice, accurate move by Polgar, black was forced to resign. And that move was bishop to f7. So let's see what happens. There are three captures, well, four captures here in total, three pawn captures and three captures of pawns, and rook takes f7. So if rook takes f7, this is just no big deal. White's going to win this pretty easily, but at least this avoids any further catastrophe for the moment. But it's its own catastrophe, so to speak. Okay, what else? If g takes h5, then rook to d8 check, and then g6 check wins a full rook. Takes, king takes, and then rook d6 check forks the king and the bishop. Frankly, even if it didn't, white would be winning and just run the c-pawn, but a whole rook is makes it even clearer. If h takes g5, basically the same thing. Check, check again, and if the king comes up, then he gets mated, like so. And if rook takes g6, it's what we just saw. White takes the rook, and then takes the pawn with the fork. Okay, and then finally, if bishop takes g5, then after h takes g6, the poor rook is just trapped on g7, and white threatens, well, a lot of things. Rook takes d6 is one obvious thing, followed by running the c-pawn. Another is just to move the rook somewhere to the side, c7, b7, a7, with the crushing threat of rook to b8 check. So black is still going to have to cough up the exchange here sooner or later, and this is completely hopeless. Okay, so that was a little bit of a gift for her, but it was still very early in the tournament. It was an 11-round event. This is just round 4. So at this point, she had 3.5 points. After this, she drew with Reinderman, Dmitry Reinderman, who's a 2601 player. She was black in that game, so that put her at 4-1. And then she went crazy against Marcus Rager. She had white and just got carried away with some aggressive idea in the opening, which Rager was completely able to refute. So she was just giving away material. He took it, defended very well, and beat her. So at this point, she only had 4 out of 6. Not a terrible score by any means, but at this point, Potkin had 6-0. So she was off the pace, to put it mildly. Well, now we come to round 7. She had black against Levon Pensulia. I think he's from Georgia, if I recall correctly. Let me check. Yep, he's Georgian Grandmaster. So this was perhaps her showiest game of the event. Maybe not quite perfectly played, but still a very nice game. So she has black, as I said, and then queen c2 is not a very good idea in this particular position. So there are some similar positions where white has already played d4 where it's perfectly good, but here it doesn't seem very strong, and she does a nice job of really punishing it. So c5, d4, hoping to kind of get back to the usual channels, but after c takes d4 and e5, white's not going to get there, and in fact black is already better in this position, and she plays very energetically in this game. Knight to b3, knight c6, bishop g2, again hoping to just castle and maybe take on d5 at some point and play knight c3 and get to some kind of business as usual position. But she's playing very aggressively and alertly. I mean, I've mentioned this before. When something seems slightly wrong about your opponent's position, I mean, that's really a time to try to jump on it. Okay, so something's wrong with his position. I mean, white hasn't castled yet. The queen is a little bit funny. Black can make these tempo moves. The pawn on c4 could be hanging. The knight on b3 is misplaced. So she just tries to jump all over him and finds a great way to do it. So knight to b4. All right, this looks like some kind of duffer's move, but in this position it's very good because the c4 pawn is loose. So after queen d1, she could have played bishop to f5, and this wouldn't be bad either by any means. But d takes c4 was the introduction to a very nice idea. So knight 3 to d2, now bishop to f5, knight a3, and here white's hoping that he can just castle or play knight d takes c4 maybe if he has to, and he's threatening the pawn on b7, and again just kind of hoping he can unravel with maybe just a little inconvenience. But Polgar doesn't give him a chance. b5 is a very good move. So now there's no queen a4, there's no bishop takes b7, there's no capturing on c4. White is just completely lost unless he takes the rook. But having taken the rook, he's got huge problems. He can't castle because bishop to h3 would just win the material back right away. Well, would win the exchange back right away. and leave her with a completely winning position. But what else can he do here? So he tried knight to f3. Now, probably the simplest way to go here is just queen to c6, protecting the pawn on b5. After castles, well, Polgar can again play bishop to h3, and this is good too. Knight takes e5 allows mate and 1 on g2, and rook to e1 would be bad too, because after knight to g4, I think white is just losing here. She's going to play bishop to c5. That's one idea. Another idea is to play e4, e3. That probably needs to be prefaced by, well, actually, it's not entirely clear if it does. It probably needs to be prefaced by bishop to c5, but the idea is, okay, e4. If knight to d4, which is the only move that makes any sense, I mean, if knight to g5, then e3 has a double attack of queen g2 mate, and e takes f2. Okay, so e4, knight to d4, e3, knight takes c6, e takes f2, king h1, and probably it's not quite good enough for black just yet. But you can queen, or you can take the rook and make a queen. It's not quite good enough, but it's close. And if there's the bishop's on c5, there's no knight to d4 defense. So this is at least interesting. And here, black is winning. Again, rook to e1 is enforced here, but it's a lousy position in any case. Anyway, she played the much more, let's say, hyper-aggressive knight to d3 check. Okay, it's not probably best, but it's not bad either. E takes d3, and now she plays bishop takes d3, preventing the white king from castling. Queen e4 check ideas are in the air. It's even if this isn't the very best that black could have done, it's still pretty unpleasant for white to deal with. Another idea is bishop to g4, which allows castling, but then black has has full control over this long diagonal, and has laid down the exchange for a pawn. So this is quite good for her too. Okay, so Polgar played bishop takes d3. Knight takes b5 is a good move. It's pretty much forced. So that way the knight can block on c3. Because if the bishop blocks, then queen e4 check is mate next move. So knight to c3, and she can just calmly castle. White's not going anywhere. Okay, rook to g1, clearing the diagonal. Knight to e4, piling up. Bishop to d2. And here, again, while Polgar's move wasn't bad, really, she missed a big improvement here that was found by Shipov, or maybe his computer, or maybe both. So rook to b8 is a really powerful move, although it's quite easy to miss just on spec how strong it is. And in fact, she does bring the rook to b8 later on in the game. So I'll show a couple of variations just to illustrate the power of this move. So let's say rook to c1, which is the move chosen by Pensulia in the game after rook to d8 instead. Well, now knight takes c3. Okay, again, bishop takes c3 is not really so good because of queen e4 check, and after king to d2, well, bishop to e2 looks quite good. Actually, no, probably rook to d8 first is much simpler. So b takes c3 is probably forced. Bishop to a3, and what does the rook do? If it goes to a1, then she can just play bishop to b2, which is actually especially strong, not just because it hits the rook, but because there's also the threat of queen to e4 check, bishop to e3, and then bishop takes c3 check. So knight to g5 is probably forced to control the e4 square, but now takes, f6, and after the knight runs away, queen e4 check. Okay, if bishop to e3, rook to b1, so there we see the basic kind of idea with the rook on the b file. If king to d2, now bishop to c2 is very, very strong, threatening rook to d8 mate, and if queen takes c2, then check, and this wins everything. First the queen, and then checkmates the king. So after rook to b8, rook c1 is no good. Okay, let's try knight to g5 instead. Well, now again, takes, and then f6, and, well, the knight can't retreat to f3 because it just gets captured. Let's say a3. Well, now bishop takes c3, bc, fg, and some position like this, black is winning. So she's down the exchange, but again, the white king can't go anywhere. Can't castle kingside, obviously it's illegal, and castling queenside allows rook to b1 mate, And meanwhile, black is just going to play, for instance, queen to b7, followed by rook to b2. And that's devastating. So rook to b8 looks like a winner. But rook to d8 certainly isn't a bad move. It does improve black's position. Rook c1, takes, bishop a3, bishop to e3, takes and takes. Okay, so white is still up a piece for a pawn here, but after rook to b8, there it is again, he's still completely tied down. I mean, Polgar has all the fun in this position. And the problem is there's not really any way for white to kind of neutralize this. The king, he's just stuck. He can't get to the king side. He can't run to the corner on a1. And, of course, if he could here, it would be rook to b1 mate in response. So he battles on and defends pretty well for a while. So he's been finding only moves for some time and continues. Knight to d2, queen d5, queen a4. And now it's a nice quiet move, a5. The queen is going nowhere. And again, it's just a matter of white trying to meet the threats as they come. So he went back with the queen to d1. Polgar takes time out to make sure that no back rank problems will arise. And here white probably should have played something like knight to f1, giving himself more options or more ways of dealing with this possibility of queen to e4. Still, black has certainly full compensation for the material here, but the game goes on. Instead, Pensilia played queen f3 and now loses to this very nice move, rook to b1. Okay, so the obvious points, okay, the rook can't be taken because it hangs the queen. And taking the queen is even worse because of rook c1 mate. So he played king to d1. Now here maybe Polgar could have won a little bit more quickly. Instead of her e4, she could have played queen to d7, which would have been good. Just threatening queen to a4 check, followed by rook takes c1 mate. Knight takes b1 is refuted by bishop to e4 check, or I should say met by it. I mean, white is lost in any case. Oops. And if queen to a8 check, followed by queen takes a5 to cover the a4 square, then bishop to e4 is very strong, threatening bishop to f3 check. So that's about the best that white can do, but now queen d3, queen takes e5, and this finally collapses with bishop takes e2 check. Okay, if king e1, rook c1 is mate, so queen e2, and now simple removing the guard combination wins the game. Black's going to be up a queen for a knight and a pawn. Okay, so that would have been a little bit better, but e4 wasn't terrible. It didn't throw away the winning advantage. So queen to f4, and now rook to a1. Another nice quiet move. Just getting the rook out of the way, keeping the pressure on the back rank, and all that's needed now is to get the queen into the act, and it's over. All right, well here, if it was black's move, she would just play queen to b5 and then queen to a4 check. So queen to b8 check was played, and after king h7, Pensilia played g4. If queen to b2, which looks good at first, right? The rook is trapped, and if rook to b1, knight takes b1, there aren't any good discoveries for the bishop. But Polgar has this, queen to h5 check, g4, queen takes h2. Okay, threatening to take the rook is mating, or if it's not mating, it's winning just about everything, and I think it does mate. So what does white do? If he played rook to f1, then e3 is winning, threatening just e2 check. And if knight to f3, then we can take rook e1, and then, since there's no more knight on d2, rook to b1 saves the rook. So instead of queen to b2, white tried g4. Okay, queen to d7, threatening queen to a4 check, queen to e5. Now there's a little trick here. If black continued with the plan with queen to a4 check, knight to b3, and then, for instance, took on b3, then it's perpetual check. Queen f5, queen c8, and so on. Well, I guess black could get out of the perpetual check by queen to e8, but then she would just be lost. Okay, however, c takes b3 isn't forced. She could just play e3, so the bishop on d3 covers f5, and there's no perpetual. And in the game, she just basically inverted the move order. So she played e3 first. F takes e3, queen a4 check, king e1, rook c1, and then rook takes g1. And he resigned because after king takes g1, queen to d1 check, the knight falls, and again, white has no perpetual, so it's just going to be an extra piece for nothing. Okay, so a very impressive win by Polgar, very imaginative, very aggressive play, characteristic of her best chess. All right, let's move on to the next game. So that was from round 7. This is now round 8 against the Azerbaijani Grandmaster Gadir Gusinov. So she had white, and I'll just again zip through the opening very quickly. Just want to get to the ending. So everything here is pretty typical. Not sure if it's especially theoretical with the exact moves, but this type of ending is really pretty standard in the Accelerated Dragon. Okay, so we're going to zip through some more moves here. Okay, and we'll start talking about it with more seriousness at this point. So, material is even, but that certainly doesn't mean that it's a draw. White has several advantages. More space. Right now, the black queen side is vulnerable. I mean, the king would love to just jump in and start grabbing things, so black has to be a bit careful about that. Right now, it's not a big deal because king c3 can be met by a5, but all the same, it's something to be wary of. All right, well, when you've got a same-colored bishop ending, one of the rules of thumb is that you'd love to force the other guy's pawns to all be on the same color square as his bishop, and Polgar does her best to make that happen. Obviously, that can't happen with the center pawns, but with the queen side pawns and the king side pawns, it can and does. So she begins with h4. And now here I think perhaps Gusinov should have tried b4. Now this looks kind of scary because after king c4 a5, it looks as if white is on the verge of breaking through on the queen side, but it's not actually so easy. For instance, bishop to d3. Now the idea is to do a little recycling here. King goes to d4, the bishop goes to a6, the king comes back to c4, and then the bishop goes to b5. But even if all that's achieved, I'm not sure that works either. So for instance, king f6, let's say f4 to keep the black king bottled up, h5, g5 check, king f7, king d4, and now bishop to c8. So if king c4, bishop to a6, and, well, even if bishop to b5, black can just mark time here. Say bishop to b7. Oops, let's say king c4. There we go. Bishop to c8. And on bishop c6, you always have bishop to a6 check. So white cannot break through, at least not this way. And I'm not sure if there is any way to break through. Maybe one try could be to bring the king back to b2, play a3, and if this exchange happens, then we bring the king back around, put the bishop on c4, and do this all over again and try to win the pawn. Or if b takes a3, king takes a3 to play king a4, king to a5. So maybe that could be a way to try to make some progress. So I can't just say this is a draw, this is the end, but it's at least another try. It's worth considering to be sure. Okay, well, black played h6, g5, hg5, hg5. Again, maybe b4 can be played. In the game, Gusinov played king to f7, and now after a3, well, that's done. That's not going to happen anymore. So a5, king d4, king g7, bishop d3, king f7, f4. So all the pawns are on dark squares for white. And there we go. So b4. Okay, black can't take, obviously, because king b4, and then bishop takes b5. So a4 is forced. And now white has made some progress. But we still have to figure out, how do we break through? The bishop covers the pawn on b5, and there's no way for white to attack it a second time. The king protects the pawn on g6, and it can even be defended a second time with bishop to e8. There's no way for the king to break through, for white's king to break through, at least as the pawns are now. And the e7 and d6 pawns can't be attacked either. So you might just think that this is a draw. Well, let's watch what happens. King d4, king g7, king e3, king f7, king f3. Okay, then the king runs over, and now bishop to g4. Okay, so this looks pretty good at first sight. If black trades bishops, White then plays f5 and should win pretty routinely with the outside passed pawn. But black played bishop to f5, and now how does white make progress? If bishop takes f5, g takes f5, well, nothing doing. King to h4, king g6. Or if we try to be clever, play king h3, then as long as black doesn't play king to g6 first, he's okay. So king to h7, king h4, king g6, and this is a draw. So considering that all the black pawns can be defended, there's no way for the white king to break in, and this the exchange gets nowhere either, you might think that this is a draw. But Polgar proves otherwise, and does so in very good style. So she plays bishop to e2, repeating the position we had before. And now here she makes the moves that she could have played then, or one of the moves she could have played then, which makes progress, although it's hard to see how exactly at first. She plays, well, I should encourage you guys to stop the recording here, maybe, if you want to try to figure it out. But it'll take some work, so you have to be patient. Anyway, the move she plays now is bishop to f1. It's not immediately evident what exactly this does, but we'll see very quickly. All right, first of all, if bishop to e8, then bishop h3. Now, this one's pretty simple. So here, the white bishop is penetrating, and we'll see in the game later on that this is in fact decisive. Okay, but that isn't forced. Well, how about just a move like king to g8? Well, here's the difference. Okay, bishop to h3. Now, if bishop to f5 at this point, bad news. Takes, king h4, king g7, king h5, and white wins. The king got in before the black king made it to g6. So you might say, well, why not play king to f7? Well, that's the move that happens in the game. So that takes care of the bishop to h3 idea. But let's go back to this first. Okay, so king g8, bishop h3. What about taking right away? This proves to be actually quite interesting. King takes h3, king f7, king g4, and now, of course, if king g7, f5 is very easy. For those of you who aren't really familiar with this kind of idea, I'll give a quick demonstration. So takes, king f7, g6 check, king here, king f8, g7 check. That's what the outside passed pawn is for. You use it as a diversion. It's something that ties the enemy king down and at some point forces it to give way. And then here, after king takes e7, white can win all three pawns if she so desires. Okay, so instead of king to g7, though, black has the much better move e6. And after d takes e6, king e6, it's far from clear that white is winning this. I mean, if something like king to f3 here, then after king f5, king e3, probably d5, well, now it's like black has the outside passed pawn. I'm not sure if he's winning here, but certainly this isn't what white had bargained for. Let's see, where should we go? Probably f5. So takes here, and maybe this is going to be a draw, but certainly black is not hurting here. So this looks like it should be okay for black, but there's a remarkable win for white. f5 check. This is really neat. Okay, well, of course, if the king retreats, then f takes g6, and we have our outside passed pawn situation again. Routine win. So g takes f5, and now not king f4, I mean, then just d5, and black is winning, but king h5. So the g pawn will promote unless the black king runs back. But if the black king runs back, then white can win. So, for instance, king f7, g6, king g7, king g5. Well, actually, we're going to see something very much like this in a moment. So f4, takes. We're going to reach this in our main line. So we'll get to this position. And now king to c6. So the way we're going to get there is instead of king f7, just f4 right away. King g4, king e5, g6, and we get the same thing. So, of course, if black could play king to d7, he's just winning, but white gets there first. And after king takes a4, the white king can come back in front of the d pawn, and then it's a pretty easy win, because the white queenside passers are self-protecting. So let's say, well, okay, I'll just give some moves, not necessarily representing best play, but just to give some idea. Okay, well, actually, this is even easier because you can just play b5 and drive the king further away. Okay, so if king e6, a7, and if the king goes back, you win the pawn. But All right, I'll be a little sloppier. So let's say king c6, or sorry, a5, king c6, a6, king b6, and then b5. So that's the point I was trying to make about the pawns being self-protecting. So sooner or later, the black king has to give up the d pawn, and then it's an easy win. Okay, so that was a long variation, but it's all pretty much forced. So king f7 is the best try, I think, not giving up the diagonal. So if bishop to h3 again, bishop to f5 is good enough. Okay, bishop to d3, king g7, and now king h4. So this is a good move. And the point of this, and this is really what she should have done, I suppose, immediately, just to save time, but it's fine. Nothing has been damaged. All right, so here, if king f7, bishop f1, king g7, bishop h3 wins. Again, the same point. We already saw how white wins if you have the exchange. So if bishop takes h3, king f7, king g4, e6 takes, f5 is winning. Okay, that's familiar stuff now. And if bishop to f5, this is familiar too. We take, and the king gets in. Okay, so in the game, Guseynov tried bishop to e8. Now, bishop to e2. Again, if bishop to d7, bishop g4, same stuff. We've been there and seen that. Okay, so king f8, bishop g4, and now Guseynov tried bishop to f7. Okay, she plays bishop to e6. Now if the exchange happens, so this is a different version, but this one's also still winning for white. So takes, okay, king g7, doesn't really matter. Ultimately, the white king goes over to the queen side, though she could play f5 here too and win, but king d5. And now what does black do? If king e8, then king c6. So the white king can grab the queenside pawns without ever getting outside the square of black's d pawn, not even close. So that's winning. If king to c7, well then the black king is too far away, f5, and white's going to promote one of the g pawns. Well, either the true g pawn or the f5 pawn as it becomes a g pawn. All right, so back here we see then that bishop e6 is also losing. So Guseynov tries bishop to e8. Okay, well you still might not be sure how this is a win. So again, the bishop protects the pawns. f5 is not fatal. I mean, black can just trade and put the king on g7 and sit there, because the white king can never penetrate to attack the b5 pawn, or at least not through c5. Well, Polgar proves that this is a win. King g4, king g7. I mean, the black bishop can't move. The king and pawn endings are lost. So king g7, king f3, king f8, king e4, king g7. Bishop c8, king f7, king d4, king f8. Okay, so now what? Well, here's the next idea. Bishop to b7, followed by bishop to c6. And now we see big problems for black. His bishop can't run away from the b5 pawn, because once that drops and the a4 pawn drops, it's really trivial. So bishop to d7, bishop c6, and now there's a choice. You can either play bishop to e8 or king to e8. Well, if bishop to e8, it's again a win. Takes, king e4, and f5. And white's there in time. And once again, we have our very basic, very simple outside passed pawn winning variation. Okay, so back to this position. In the game, instead of bishop to e8, Guseynov tried king to e8. So it's the last-ditch effort. Now, actually, I think... oh, no. Yeah, this time it's not so clear. If bishop d7, king d7, king e4, e6 takes, because now f5 check, g takes f5. There's no king h5. The king is on the wrong side. But Polgar is winning here with the breakthrough move, f5, taking advantage of the pin. After g takes f5, g6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, black is lost. The king can't stop both of the pawns. But notice, you should never fall asleep and assume that the game is just won no matter what. If g7 trying to be cute and only then play d takes c6, black would have bishop takes d5 and would win. So the right move is d takes c6. So because of this, here after f5, Guseynov resigned. Very nice endgame by Polgar. Okay, so that was round 8. That put her at 6-2. In the next round, she beat Lupulescu, a Romanian grandmaster, with black, put her at 7-2, and I think at this point she was tied for first. Okay, round 10, she played Iordașescu, I believe another Romanian grandmaster. Certainly, with a name like that, if he's not Romanian, he should get his money back. Yeah, okay, I take it back. He's from Moldova. All right, and since I'm such a know-it-all, let me make sure that that I had it right about... oh, no, I can't, sorry. Yeah, so anyway, okay, I apologize to Iordașescu and his fans. Maybe he was from Romania, but Moldova is apparently his current federation. Anyway, this is round 10. Polgar had white, and let's have a look. So again, we'll kind of zip through the opening moves here. We've got the short variation. Actually, no, this isn't the short variation. I'm not sure who this particular sub-variation of the advance Caro-Kann is named after. Maybe no one. It's been used in some high-level games. I remember Kramnik won with this in the last game of his match with Leko, and that let him save his title. And it's been used in some other high-level games as well. So it's maybe by transposition it's kind of a short variation. Anyway, so in this position it looks fairly normal, like nothing too serious is happening. Black is ready to castle. White's got the bishop pair, but it's not that meaningful here. It's not such a big deal. Black has a lot of squares on the queen side. Maybe he'll play after he castles something like a6 and b5 and knight b6 and knight c4. I'm not sure if that's best, but certainly the knight coming to b6 and then to c4, or maybe knight c4, c5, e4 could be another idea. Roughly speaking, it's about equal, certainly if nothing special happens. But now Polgar makes something special happen. So she plays c4, which is a good move, a very aggressive move. And now, well, okay, first thing is there's a simple tactic. If d takes c4, then rook c1 is just winning. Black can't do anything about this terrible knight on d7, so he can't castle, can't play rook to d8 because of the bishop on g5, and meanwhile rook takes c4 is next, so this is hopeless. But okay, this is simple stuff, and he played a6. And now, if something like bishop takes d7 check, I mean, white can give black an isolated pawn, but it's no big deal. So a position like this is really about even. The d5 pawn is not terribly weak. The opposite colored bishops make black very safe here. I'm not sure if the black king can safely park on e6 because of g4, but certainly no really big problems. Just king e7, rook h to d8, and the other rook might come to c2. This is pretty good for black. Not better, but equal. But here Polgar showed that she had something really special in mind. So she played c takes d5, which I don't think it promises an advantage, but it also seems to be completely sound. I mean, I think there is no move that's demonstrably better for white. And as a practical matter, this is very difficult for black to handle. And indeed, he was unable to eventually cope with the task. Okay, well now taking is not nearly as attractive because of the threat of rook to c1. And the bishop is protecting there, so that will be pretty clumsy. So a takes b5 is more or less forced. Rook to c1. Okay, queen to b8. Again, forced. D takes e6. Fe6 is forced. Queen to b3. Well, right now, white has only one pawn for the piece, but it's definitely plenty of compensation here. So the threat, well, the pawns on e6 and b5 are threatened. I'm not sure that black can get away with castling, because queen takes e6, rook f7, maybe, okay, then maybe we just trade rooks, play rook c1, and then queen to d5, for example, and the threat of e6 is very strong. So I think black is really in a lot of trouble here. Maybe the best try is king to f7, connecting the rooks and protecting the pawn on e6. So now, for instance, if queen takes b5, then rook to c6, takes, and then knight e5. And I think, relatively speaking, black is okay. And one very interesting idea here is now if g4, black might consider returning the extra piece. So g takes f5, bishop f5, and now white's up a pawn, but the black king is going to be as snug as a bug in a rug when it retreats to g8. And meanwhile, the white king side is a bit breezy, especially on the light squares on the diagonal. So this, I think, king f7, I think this would have been perhaps the best way for black to play. All right, but knight f8 is quite a logical move as well. Preparing, well, it defends the pawn, prepares king f7 and king g8. The difficulty with this, though, as opposed to king f7, is that with king f7, you have the rooks connected. So they are going to come into play, whereas here, right now, white is, while he's down, I keep doing that, sorry. While she is down a piece, but only for 2 pawns, so not even very much material. Functionally, you might say she's up the exchange, because that rook on h8 is just buried there. So this is not good times for black at all. So queen to b8, protecting the b7 pawn, and now g4, another very good move, attempting to either weaken the black king or drive this knight into oblivion. So if knight to e7, which is not what Yordashescu played, then takes, queen to b6, threatening, well, a few things. Rook to c7 check most obviously, but also in conjunction with that, knight to g5 or knight to d4. So knight to d7, queen to b4 check, and this has in mind not allowing the rook to come into play. So if king to d8, then knight to d4, queen takes e5, rook e1, and if bishop to e4 to stop knight takes e6 from happening, then knight f3, white regains the piece, and she's clearly better. On the other hand, if king to f7, well, knight g5 check, and the rook still stays out of the game. Bishop f7, queen e7, queen e8, and white can even just patiently swap and play knight to c7. Black probably has nothing better than king f7, returning the extra piece to get the rook into the play again. And bishop takes d7, and white's going to be, of course, much better with a couple of extra pawns, but the bishop will be good. The pawn on g4 is slightly overextended, so black still has some small chances to save the game here. If bishop to g6 instead, trying to maintain the extra piece, then rook to d1, knight f8, and the rook is really comical now, and then e6, followed by e7 and e8. So white is regaining the piece anyway, but this is under better conditions than would have been the case after king f7. Anyway, black did not go for knight to e7, but chose knight h6. Okay, well now Polgar played queen to b4, eyeing the e7 square, king g8, takes, and now queen to e7. Again, while the black king is safe, the rook on h8 is a little too safe. It's just it's dormant. So Yordashescu played queen to e8. She took another pawn, queen a4, b4. And now, okay, we see there's a new problem. Since white is, again, functionally up a rook here, or up the exchange, I should say, she can simply just play chess and take advantage of these outside passes. She doesn't have to give mate. She's got these other trumps that she can use. So black played bishop to e8. Here she played queen to e7, which isn't bad. It's also worth considering knight to d2 with the idea of knight to e4. So there's no reason why she can't combine the advance of her queenside pawns with continued threats against the hapless black king, which could get smothered by that rook. Okay, so she played queen e7, which isn't bad. After queen d7, rook c7. And in this position, with 3 pawns for the piece, the rook on h8 still completely out of play, and 2 very dangerous queenside passers getting ready to run down the board. And we can even add that black has a weak pawn on e6. With all of these assets, white, we can say, is winning. So in this desperate position, Yordashescu played bishop to d5, protecting the pawn on e6, attacking the pawn on a2, and preparing knight to g6. Well, Polgar didn't care too much about the pawn on a2 and just played b5. So knight to g6, rook c7. Yeah, and notice c7. It's a very good move. The reason it's good is that after knight takes e5, you'll notice that all the further comeback squares remain covered. And it's also nice that it's on a dark square, so the bishop can't bother it, and c6 and d7 remain under control. So the black knight is not getting, at least not easily getting, any further on the queen side. Okay, here Polgar played f4. May not be necessary. Maybe just b6 straight away is perfectly fine. But all right, f4 didn't ruin anything. Knight f7, f5 takes, knight takes f5. Okay, threatening knight to e7, and also threatening rook to c8, which is an even bigger threat. All right, black managed to avert an immediate catastrophe with bishop to e6, but now the bishop is no longer keeping guard over the b5 pawn. So b6, and now it threatens to just run all the way home. Bishop takes f5, so now if b7, king g7. So g takes f5, well, it could transpose. King g7, b7. And finally, it's only took 40 moves, but this rook is finally moved. So if we look back here, right, so in this position, all the way back here, actually we can go all the way even to here. So here on move 11, black just played bishop takes c5 and is ready to castle on the very next move, but never got the chance to. So only now, finally, on move 40, 29 moves later, does this rook enter the game. All right, unfortunately, he's just too late. Now, if the king were on g8 here, then black would be okay. He gets knight to d6 in time. But she doesn't let it happen. a4, the king has to get out of the way. a5, knight to d6, and a6. So the pawn is protected just in time. a7 is coming next, and black is lost. So the game went king takes f5, a7, which would win just immediately, but there's check, and knight takes b7. Okay, so after all of this, well, material is still even at the moment, although white can regain the, or it can go up a pawn by taking on h7 whenever she wants to. But the important thing really is that black is just tied down. So black hopes that he can draw by bringing his king over to the queen side maybe, and grabbing the pawn, but it's not even close. So king e3, she threatens to just bring the king to b6, and if the king gets to b6, it's over. Rook to b8 next. So king e5, rook takes h7, and the tough thing for black is that whichever way his king goes, white's king can go the opposite direction and win. So if the black king stays on the king side, again, the king goes to b6, and white plays for rook to b8, or just king to b7 for that matter, if permitted. If the black king runs to the queen side, well then, king f4, king g4, king h5, king h6, and we just push the h-pawn, and black can never play rook takes a7, or even get his king to a8, because, well, he'll lose the king and pawn ending by a lot of tempi after rook a7, king a7, while if, well, and he can't get the king to a8 because the rook on the 7th rank forms an unbreakable barrier. So black tried a third strategy, which was to use the king to kind of shadow the white king and also help out by using the rook for defensive duties. Okay, now rook c8 has a second idea, which is that if rook takes h6 happens, then the rook can go behind the pawn and restrict the white king to some extent. Now, white is still winning. She'll start with rook to h7, and again, the king will make progress. So king c2, king b2, and running up. But much better than allowing this is what Polgar played. So she played king to d3, not allowing this rook c3 check idea. Okay, Yordashevsky played king to d5, and now, well, why not? Rook takes h6, and now it's two extra pawns. King c5, and here she switches directions. Rook to a6, threatening the queen, so rook a8 is forced. Now the rook is completely passive, and Polgar just pushes. h4, king b5, rook a1, king b6, and now I don't know if it happened in the game or not, but king to e4. Sometimes, you know, when white wins, if they're playing on a DGT board, what they do is they put the kings on light squares. So the kings would have been put on e4 and d5, and if it's not done right, it's interpreted as a move. So I don't know if king to e4 is the move that was actually played. I mean, white can just play h5, and that can do the trick. So h5 is one idea, king c4 is another idea, but king e4 is certainly a reasonable move too. And anyway, in this position, or maybe before it, black resigned. So very nice ending by Polgar. So we looked at two, well, this is an all-around nice game. So a very, very interesting and dynamic way of playing the opening that ended up leading to a winning ending much later on. But anyway, you could see, I mean, her play was very, very interesting in this event. I should say, the last round she drew with Potkin, so they just did a quick draw. And because Potkin had been ahead the entire tournament, he had the best tie breaks and won. As I said, she took third behind Wojtaszek. But definitely, I think her games were perhaps overall the most interesting of the winners. So not necessarily saying she played the best chess, but certainly really interesting games. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did, and not sure what I'll do next time, but we'll figure something out. So thanks a lot. See you next week. Bye-bye.